If I speak in tongues of mortals and of angels, but I don't have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give away all my possessions, if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious. Or boastful or arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Let me repeat that. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For now, in this life, we only know in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the end comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now, in this life, we see as in a mirror, dimly. But then, when we're in the presence of the Lord, we will see face to face. Now we only know in part. But then, we will know fully. All knowledge will be imparted on us that the Lord meant us to have before sin came into the world. There's never going to be any yeah, but Lord, I didn't know I was doing. Yeah, you knew. You'll see every fork in the road. You'll see every left-handed turn, and it will be upon you instantaneously. Now I only know in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. In the end, only faith, hope, and love abide. These three, but the greatest of these is love. I wanted to share one last, actually virtually the last correspondence I got from Dan was Tuesday morning. And he had been doing his reading from a 2007 book, and he said, this came up on me and I wanted to share it with you, which told me this morning I have to share it with you. Isaiah 43, but now, thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, who formed you, O Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I've called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Through the rivers, you shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. For some reason, this is even harder for me than remembering my mom and dad. Maybe because Dan and I had talked so much about this over the years. I tried to thumbnail a 66-year life in a couple pages here, so if you'll indulge me. Dan Randolph Casey, April 17th, 1948, October 9th, 2014. The son of Dan+r Casey Sr. and Lizzie Mae Thompson Casey, the youngest of three sons. Ed, Butch were his older brothers. Candidly, I'll share this to the best of my ability and knowledge. There might be a chronology off here, and I'm just relating stories that Dan had related to me over the decades. As I understood, Dan's father had lost a leg. The family struggled as Casey Sr. relied on disability from the government, leaving them struggling poor and relying on extended family for help and work. The boys spent time working on farm fields for relatives. Dan had told me many times how he, Butch, and Ed would pick watermelons and tobacco during summer vacations. To be kind, his dad was a puzzling man. He loved opera and Mario Lanza, but when he got drunk, he could be very abusive. His mom was required to work outside the home for income to supplement the meager benefits. He always spoke fondly of her, was saddened that she took the brunt of Casey Sr.'s abuse. The most heart-wrenching story he shared with me was about his mom. When Senior moved out to Atlanta and she was a waitress at the Pig Barbecue, she was diagnosed with breast cancer and was forced to go through an ancient mastectomy, which at that time was a barbaric act of removing both breasts, no reconstruction, no recovery time. With tears in his eyes, he told me that she had the surgery that day and went to work at Pig Barbecue that night. It was heartbreaking just to hear the story, let alone experience it as he did or live it as Miss Lizzie had to. He met his oldest friend, Jim Hendry, early in his school days, and he was always amazed, he told me, that old Jimmy was such a free spirit. Dan had never experienced this, what I can only describe as the Don Quixote Sancho Panza quest of life experience. I think he actually idolized Jimmy for his gregarious zest for life, his ability to self-teach himself musical instruments, and his overall free spirit. As Dan life unfolded in stories that he told me, he found out some early accolades and limelight at Paxton High School, where he played football and had that put it all out on the field mentality that earned him a varsity letter and actually some press clippings in the post-game articles of the Times-Union. Upon graduation, he joined the Army as Vietnam began to amp up as the saddest of many military actions the U.S. government felt compelled to become involved with. He was always very low-key with me about his Vietnam experience, but again, the saddest, heartbreaking story he shared with me was being on a chopper in combat when it was shot down and 11 of his comrades were killed and he walked away. He could never shake or understand that profound moment. He got back from Vietnam during the high point of the protest movement, faced the verbal abuse many of our heroes who came back had been exposed to, bought the dream car, the Camaro, lived in Atlanta, tried to rekindle the love of his father, who had his own demons and could never show Dan any love or respect. One of these era stories that he told me that always summed up brother's life to me was after hearing so much about Coors beer from one of his platoon mates in Vietnam, brother fires up the Camaro and drives all the way to Texas to load up his car with cases of Coors beer. Coming back to Atlanta, only to realize when he gets all the way back, this ain't that good. That was brother to me. I may have the chronology out of sync here. I never asked for a timeline. Dan moved to the University of Florida and fraternity life, married and divorced the first time. He told me he was at a Halloween party when he met the devil, a cute little brunette named Debbie, and the rest is history. He went on to get his master's degree. Black history was his thesis. Danny was born. They discovered serious heart problems as a newborn infant, and brother experienced that same helplessness he experienced watching this from the sidelines with his mom. His greatest blessing, he's always told me, was Danny pulling through and living a full and healthy life. As I understand it, he went on to work for Atlantic Bank, and bear with me for a second here, the old computer. And then moved into a role as a fast food manager at Burger King and was offered the director of marketing position when it became available. That's when we met. He, as director of marketing, would make the decisions as to where media dollars would go. For decades, most of the local Burger King radio, and I'm only giving you some background here to understand the time frame. For decades, most of the local Burger King radio dollars went to the Big 8. If you grew up here, you knew WAPE was the beach station in the southeast United States, 252 beaches, Daytona to Myrtle Beach, an institution. It was 1978, FM radio was starting to make a major factor, and Dan could see down the road, and he pulled his budget from WAPE and started spreading it to FM radio and to country music. Well, my bosses come to me at this time and they say, hey, we've got a bonus for you. I go, really? Yeah. He says, yeah, we're giving you Burger King. I go, really? You guys just lost Burger King. You're giving me nothing here. They go, yeah, but we know you can get it back. So my boss, who is kind of a nerd, gets a meeting with Dan, and so we show up at the Burger King offices. I'm wearing a blue pinstripe suit, red tie and sunglasses, and brother tells me he immediately thinks, my God, they're putting a hit on me, and it's going to happen right here in the office. He continues to explain to my boss that the Big 8 never did any promotions or events for Burger King. They just took the money and ran the commercials, no extras. All the other stations were offering all kinds of perks. So after a series of what I thought were great ideas that I presented to him, and he purposely turned me down knowing that they were great ideas, but he couldn't save face, so we really had a knockdown drag out, because I knew the last thing I brought to him that he said no to, he knew it was a great, he just could not come off of what he had already committed to. So after these ideas are turned down, he mentions to me that Burger King is sponsoring what was called Hit, Pitch, and Run, which was like punt, pass, and kick in baseball, and that Burger King was the local sponsor here. The kids would compete in their age categories for a chance to win scholarships and prizes. So I asked him, hey, what would it take for the Big 8 to get involved? So with that wise ass smirk of his, he says to me, I'll tell you what, you get Mickey Mantle for the event and you're in. I mean, Mantle was his hero. He worshiped Mantle, but he didn't think that, so, and to tell you the truth, I didn't know any better. So I run down Mickey Mantle in Dallas, Texas, and in 3 phone calls, I'm talking with Mickey Mantle on the phone, and I'm going through my spiel. I'm working with Hit, Pitch, and Run, blah, blah, blah. What would you charge in 1978? He says to me, $2,500, a first-class ticket, and hotel accommodations. So I ask him to keep the date open. I get back to Casey, and I sit down with him, and I run the spiel out, and he's looking at me like I'm in the Twilight Zone. He's stunned. He can't believe that Mickey would agree to the terms. So he has no choice, but now his hero is coming, so he says yes. So I called Mickey back and I say, Burger King's agreed to your terms. When Mickey stops me in mid-sentence, he goes, Mick, you didn't tell me it was Burger King. Well, I've got a lawsuit pending against them because they won't sell me a franchise. I swear the Lord was with me at that precise moment, because immediately, out of my mouth, I can hear myself saying, well, just think, Mickey, this could turn it around for you. And he pauses and he goes, you're right. So we do the event, and this begins to forge our relationship. We bring in Telly Savalas for a fundraiser for the Jacksonville Children's Museum. It was a great show. It lost a ton of money. Dan gets mad. at himself, me, life, Burger King, and he decides he's going to quit Burger King. So that starts the roller coaster for us. We start a company called Brothers Promotions. We're doing what we were doing together for other retail and fast food customers. I often tell people that we knew the business, but we weren't good businessmen. We struggled working harder than we'd ever worked before, but the hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper. Then in 1982, he comes back from the VA, and tearfully, he's telling me that he'd been diagnosed with Agent Orange tumors. And at this point in time, we were so deep into it, we filed for bankruptcy, and then he splits. Whenever faced, as so many people here know, whenever faced with a major trial and tribulation, he always had the tendency to take off. We always stayed in touch, but he was pretty much underground for a lot of years. The demons of his dad had came upon him, and after several failed attempts to consult fan food franchises, he couldn't work with folks that didn't have his passion or his insight. In 1982, he and I met Ray Pelletier out of South Miami with a company called January 1st, Inc. And the three of us began a tumultuous, loving business and personal relationship. Ray and Bro were so much alike in intensity and zest for business. This was Brother's second quest with Ray as Don Quixote. Both amazingly focused, yet both carrying a huge amount of baggage. They drew me in together in hopes of helping them with video and audio sales, merchandising, and sometimes I found myself in the middle as the ref in some major tirades. For whatever reason, it didn't work out because they were so much alike. Brother takes off again, and he winds up driving a cab for many years, living a meager existence. He was drinking heavily at the time, and had never followed up with the VA regarding the Agent Orange maladies. I'd continue to talk to him daily, offering some inspiration and hope. As so many vets do, he refused to seek help with the VA. These were his darkest times. He had a heart attack, and the staff at St. Luke's St. Vincent's made him start the process to file with the VA. He didn't have a choice because he couldn't pay the bills, so they started the paperwork. 18 months to 2 years later, he was granted 100% disability. And they back-timed us small things so he could find himself in a position to care for himself and get out of the cab. He began working with Leroy and a lot of projects for people that needed help. He was always a generous guy. At this point in time, when he, for lack of a better term, retired, he really devoted, as only Casey could, a huge amount of time to the Word. I've put together a box for his daughter that includes legal pad after legal pad after legal pad of stuff that he had written out. He had a computer, but he never could get away from the legal pads. And that was another Brother Casey thing. I never met a more intense guy. I never met a more generous guy. I never met a sadder guy. When I think of where he was, what he went through. But I never met a guy who was more blessed at the end of his life. And while we continued to, this was close to 30 years of talking on the phone every day if we weren't together, sometimes a couple of times a day. And I was the ear that heard more than my share of tirades and vents. And, after he'd gassed himself out, I said, okay, we're moving on now. And even if it included me, I never took it as such. But he was so blessed by the Word at the end of his life. We spent a long time talking about where he'd been, where he was going, how he was at peace with the Lord, how he knew that the blood had been shed for him. And being legal pad kind of guy that he was, he insisted. There were two things that he always touched me with. One, he never wanted to die alone and be stuck in an apartment for days or weeks before somebody found him. I said, brother, that's not going to happen. We talk every day, sometimes twice a day. And then he said, please, get my stuff to Danny. And I said, I promised that I would. And we had a contingency plan. I mean, this was so well planned out that Eddie, another one of our closest friends that goes back to the Big Ape with me and brother, had a key. I was in Detroit. Eddie had the key. If I ever couldn't reach brother for our nightly call, sometimes I had bought him a couple Christmases ago some really expensive headphones, and he would spend a couple hours at night with the headphones on, plugged in, and if I couldn't reach him, I tried the cell phone, which kind of flashed or something on him, because he'd go, hey, did you try and call me? Oh yeah, I should. So if I couldn't reach him the night or the following morning, we had a contingency plan that Eddie would go over there. And Wednesday night I couldn't reach him, and I even stretched it out, and kind of a flag. Thursday morning, I called 3 or 4 times, both the cell phone and the landline, and then I called Eddie and I said, do me a favor, will you? Will you take a ride over to Brothers? And I'm waiting, about 10:45, 10:50, Eddie calls and said, he's gone. He passed. He was laying in the bed, but there was there was a piece on his face. Leroy was there, Ed was there. Immediately Leroy laid hands over him and prayed over him. And I was on a plane by 1:45 that afternoon, and we got down here, and I told my son, it was something we planned. I mean, I almost woke up every day thinking, is this going to be it? Is this going to be it? And if he said it 4 times, I swear to you, he said it 100 times. Check my sock drawer, and please give me a call in the morning. I'm really feeling bad. And but there was a peace, and it felt good, and it was a huge honor to know him, to have been with him through the good times and the bad times, to learn from him, to feel the peace and the spirit that was in him. I would like to ask you now, if you would, if you felt comfortable and you'd want to come up and just reminisce for a couple minutes with us on a situation or something that you recall about Dan, we would be honored to have you. We are going to kind of keep a punch clock on it, and I apologize for rambling, but we'll go from there. Does anybody like to say a few words?